My name is Nicolas Morel. I'm the service design and deployment lead for Honeywell regarding collaboration services. I've been working on Lync 2010 design and deployment for the last 2 years, and we are currently deploying Lync 2013 within the organization. I'm here today to share with you our experience, all the lessons that we learned so far that we are using, that we learned with Lync 2010 and are using with our 2013 deployment, hoping that could help you to deploy your infrastructure on this new software. So first of all, a quick overview of Honeywell. For the ones who do not know Honeywell, you probably know about the brand written on this little round thermostat. So probably asking yourself how a company can actually make this kind of revenue with such a simple object. First of all, we upgraded it to something like that earlier, and we're actually doing much more than that. So we are a big conglomerate. Honeywell contains 4 big business groups, and we are doing multiple things from engines for planes to power units for planes, turbochargers for cars, bulletproof jackets, chemical components, multiple things. We are very global. You can tell that by my accent, very likely. I'm actually coming from France, from this area, and I'm working for the IT division. So the way we work is the IT division called HITS, Honeywell IT Services, provide shared IT services to all the 4 business groups. So as long as there is a service that could be beneficial for all the business groups, we are taking care of it. We are heavily outsourced, primarily in US and Europe, not so much in Asia-Pac, so that creates some interesting situations and some challenges with the providers we have to deal with in those 2 major regions. And we are making the large amount of our revenue outside of the United States. That also tells you why I'm here. From a historical perspective, Honeywell is very conservative as technology, so implementing services, being collaboration services or others, but based on a piece of technologies that are pretty new is not simple. However, implementing Lync within Honeywell has been helped with the involvement of our senior leaderships and some key players in the area. I will start with showing you a little bit more about our journey with Lync. So as I said, we started a few years ago. I don't know if any of you have actually attended the Honeywell session last year provided by Brian Cantoni. You probably remember that slide. It's now really updated. I listened to him because he's my boss, obviously, and he made a wish having all the rainbow disappearing from this graph. So that's now happening. We were really having a lot of different services managed by or provided by different pieces of software, piece of architecture, piece of technology, services that we could subscribe to our vendors. All the names have been removed, hopefully. But last year, at the same period of time, we were still having some challenges with integrating room-based video conferencing systems, with mobility as well. We're slowly starting to deploy the mobile client on our mobile workforce, and the enterprise voice deployment just started a year ago. So we are now really completely consolidated. We are using Lync 2013, or we will be using in 2 months, probably Lync 2013 for all those services, and serving those services, providing the services to all the business groups in the company. The adoption, so that's again an updated slide. So I will try not to spend too much time on those slides and try to deep dive as soon as I can in the design items. But you can see the improvement here. So we did not have that much of an increase in terms of total users on the platform, just because we rolled out Lync immediately to all our users as long as they had a PC. But you can see the improvement as far as enterprise voice is concerned. So we are really cleaning up. This is accelerating. We are facing some challenges like probably everyone else deploying enterprise voice, being related to high availability, bandwidth management, these kind of things. But we are addressing them and moving forward with it. Mobility is being increased. So we decided to enable for Lync Mobility every single user actually having a mobile device provided by the company. So by default, they get Lync Mobile. We are going to continue down that path, and we are expecting this number to increase even more and more significantly because of the introduction of the Lync 2013 mobile client and the new features that it will bring. The federation is also something very important. Being a global company, being a big conglomerate, we are doing business with a lot of different other companies. Being heavily outsourced, we also have to maintain contacts with those providers. Most of them are using some kind of UC solutions. Most of them are using some Microsoft solutions too. So we have increased the number of federated domains by a significant number. So still in the current state, some reporting information here. It's not so much to show you any number, because there are not any number. Everything is hidden. It's just to enforce the message that there is a lot of data available with Lync. If you have some resources who are actually skilled with SQL knowledge, ask them to dig in. There is a session, I think yesterday. It's going to happen again this afternoon about hardcore data analysis. I would strongly suggest you to go there if you want to learn more about that. But the message is that you can get a lot of very useful data out of the SQL databases for Lync, being the CDR or some others. So we decided to implement a special reporting server to show our business groups how Lync was helping them from a financial perspective. So that's really what it represents here. You will see there are different views, different tabs in that tool that are customized for the business groups, customized on a per-service basis. So our users, our business users, are actually able to see how much savings they are making by using Lync Conferences instead of using our previous legacy provider, how much savings they are doing by using Lync for peer-to-peer call instead of having to use the PSTN to call the office in the neighborhood. So that is very interesting, and to be honest, that really drove the adoption very well. Something else we have done, which has helped us a lot with the adoption, so I'm sharing that with you too. So for conferencing, we're using a global provider. In the past, external global provider, we were keeping track of all the numbers of all the quantities of conferences that we were still doing with them. And by using some data in the CDR of the Lync SQL databases, we were also able to track how many conferences were now being used by Lync users. So you can see the adoption that really raised significantly at the moment we enabled all the users. It's interesting to see the patterns as well correlated to life events, I would say, like Christmas. And you probably think right now that it's decreasing, and we are seeing the red line climbing a little bit. So there is a reason for that. Those statistics were stopped on Christmas last year, and this graph is actually, the last data this graph contains is related to before Christmas vacation, so when the Christmas vacations are actually starting. So it's not that the global provider actually increased, it's that the total number of conferences was decreasing, and therefore the proportion was kept. Another information to understand that is that we are still keeping a footprint of that global provider for large conferences, for town halls, because we have to for operator-assisted meetings and town halls. So that explains why the red line is still there, and will probably continue to be there for some time. So some items, some conclusions that I can share with you since we have deployed Lync 2010. So there are a lot of information provided by Microsoft. Some of them are very marketing oriented. You have all seen the nice, glossy, and sexy slides from Microsoft and all the providers providing associated services. Those are real facts. So those are things that we are actually seeing within Honeywell. The top one is obviously the savings and cost avoidances related to peer-to-peer calls, replacing those PSTN calls to the neighborhood by those peer-to-peer calls. Conferencing 1v1 instead of having this external service being paid on a per-conference basis, plus the communications. We are now having our internal conferencing system. We have installed centralized SIP trunks for incoming PSTN calls, so we are also able to serve that to the external world. And we have obviously deployed edge infrastructures out of our two global US data centers and our European data center for web conferencing. All of this, especially the SIP trunk implementation, allowed us to negotiate, to make really good negotiations on large volume for minutes. So rather than having multiple points, entry points with multiple rates, we are using two big providers, one in the US, one in the other regions, and we have a very, very low rate for every single minute for dial-in. Productivity improvement is something real, especially for our remote workers, people traveling a lot. I'm a good example of it. I used to work in the office 60–70% of the time. I am now working from home 99% of the time when I'm not traveling. So, and I can work during my travels as well. So that really helps. Being able to take those conference calls, being able to collaborate with your colleagues and your folks while on the road is really, really a key thing for us. The decision-making process acceleration was actually the key driver for Honeywell to move to Lync 2010. We are now seeing this obviously as a reality, even though we can improve on that standpoint by integrating Lync, integrating the different modalities into our business processes. But still, it's now very easy, as you can imagine, to see if someone, you need a decision to be made. You can include any of those people in a call, an IM, and get the decision made straight away. Use polls, for example, at the end of a presentation is something I do personally a lot, trying to convince my audience and making sure they understood my concept and they are actually buying in my conclusions by using polls helps. Obviously, take a screenshot of those. Enhanced collaboration really goes with decision-making process, so results one click away, pretty simple. Decrease of defect, so being a global organization, we are also very ITIL orientated, so we are developing services and packages, configuration, examples, build book, run books, things like that, and being in a position to actually remove all those legacy PBXs from the branches, which is something we're still doing, being able to standardize our telephony service into one specific piece of technology and very shortly selected vendors allows us to develop specific documentation that we use over and over. So when we identify a defect, we correct it and it will never come back again. So that was not the case pre-Lync, where multiple vendors, multiple teams, multiple providers working their different ways, so defect was there. Integration-wise, we were really not that far last year when Brian talked about that. So we made a little progress. We are still progressing. We still have some room for improvement there. We have workflows. We have Lync included in our workflows. So there's a product that we use where we can draw processes. You can draw some logic, drive some logic in there, and use Lync as a notification system. So your users, managers, whoever is included in the workflow will receive a notification, either just to keep him aware about the state, or also to provide feedback. So if he would like to approve, I don't know, an example could be approving a travel for someone rather than having to write an email or be with someone on a call or log into an internal system, well, with 5, 6, 10, or 15 clicks, just saying yes in an AM chat will complete the workflow step. Basic SharePoint integration, so that's not rocket science, that works out of the box, right? But that helps as well. We have team sites all over the place, associated to teams, to projects, so it could be long-term or short-term, and that's really a good thing to be able to see who is online and being able to contact him to go back, and that goes back into the decision-making process acceleration thing. We are just starting on integration with contact centers. There are a couple of projects going on. Some of us are actually here in the conference to discover some of the solutions. So I don't know if there are any in the room. We'll see you. And there is an ongoing project for embedding the chats into some intranets, especially in our case in HR intranets. So not very far in the integration yet, but this is really, I think, where anyone can innovate. And yes. So I got to repeat all the questions for the recording. So did we decide? the question is, are we working on contact center integration, and did we decide of a vendor yet? So yes, we are working on it. We're actually scanning the market to see what's possible. So we have not decided yet. So the drivers. So really, we deployed Lync 2010 2 years ago. That was brand new product on the market, especially for a company like us. But there were a few choices, a few drivers to push us to go to Lync 2013. One of them, which is not documented here, which is not written here, is currency. At Honeywell, we like to keep things current more and more, especially in the IT division. So having a software which is not the most current anymore, not so good. We were also able to leverage some pretty good negotiations, pretty good deals we made with Microsoft. So the upgrade to Lync 2013, I would not say was at no cost, but was at not a significant cost. Apart from that, the main driver for us, probably the same for most of you in the room, is the mobile client. So that mobile client that now supports voice and video over IP, people are crying for it because they want to make the savings associated with it. There are obviously lots of challenges. Some stations are talking about it in this conference, especially in the wireless network, and not only that one. The things that also attracting for us in the new mobile client is the possibility to better customize it. Just to give you the example, actually I think I have a slide about it, but anyway, we have very, very strong security requirements within Honeywell because of the business we are doing, and we are not allowed very often to expose services on the internet or on unsecured network. Outlook is one of it, and therefore EWS is one of it. So the Lync 2010 client, within the Lync 2010 client, you don't have the opportunity to disable by policy or by anything EWS integration. So our users are ending up having error messages on their clients. They have to live with it, but they do. And that's a bit annoying. So the new clients actually allows to disable that. So that's a good thing for us. Security enhancements. So I will come down into the details, I think, on the next slide. So I will not tell you more right now. Disaster recovery and high availability. That is a real challenge for us. So we had written a lot of different scripts running on all our front-end servers, exporting the data, all the data, contact lists, but not only that. And we were replicating all this data across our global data centers just in case one of them is crashing, we're able to import back the data. We made some benchmarking for this data import. That is really taking a long time. To give you you probably remember those numbers now. We have more than 100,000 users, so you can imagine how long that would take to import all the contacts for all those users in SQL. The estimation is 8 hours, which limits a little bit our high availability capacity. So that new version leverages SQL mirroring, this now brand new backup service where pieces of information are synchronized between the different front-end servers. Does not only rely anymore only on the SQL backend. So those improvements are really, really a big driver for us since Lync is a critical service. Conference rooms, we were struggling for sometimes with integrations. So we have multiple conference room systems within Honeywell for multiple vendors, always the same ones, obviously. We have kicked off multiple projects to try to integrate Lync 2010 with those conference room systems. Some of them were successful, but not so good, and some of them were just failing. So the direct integration or native integration of the Lync room systems is also something key for us. Large conferences could be a surprise because large conferences are supported on Lync 2010, but everything takes time within Honeywell. So we decided to include support for large conferences on the Lync 2013 project, so we have more lever to actually make it happening. Better alignment with personas. So personas is something strong within Honeywell. We have personas for almost everything, shop floor workers, engineering, and we are trying to provide services, predefined set of services to each of those persona. The way the 2010 architecture was designed did not really allow that flexibility. So we are using that opportunity to redesign most of the policies so they better match with persona definitions, and I got some details about that. By the way, the picture on the top are two of my guys, and you can see how happy they are using the mobile client. So the process is just to enforce, we are very ITIL oriented, more and more, month after month. I don't know if anyone is using ITIL or is embracing the IT framework recently. I was one of the guy who actually browsed the web to try to find a good list for artifacts for a good service design package. So the experience drove us to actually build this big one. So you got a list here which is pretty extensive, which we are using as a standard for global services. So that's my present to you. But that's also basically to enforce with you that deploying Lync within such a large group is not trivial. And you have to think about everything on day one, even before it's being deployed, especially because you don't deploy it yourself. You have to give all those documentations to a provider, and the provider will deploy it and manage it for you afterwards. So if you want it to be done the right way, it needs to be documented the right way. So that explains I'm not saying the delays, but the preparation effort in deploying such services within Honeywell. The big steps at the bottom. So we are really, really close to the pilot phase for Lync 2013. I could say we are using it already because we have a full lab built up and running with it. So we have a few key selected users, my team basically, using it already. All right, so the interesting part, the lessons learned. Don't really pay attention to the flow chart here. This is just to illustrate the complexity of that thing. So being a conservative company as far as IT is concerned, Lync 2010 and Lync 2013 is actually pushing a lot of changes, huge amount of changes within the IT groups. We have IT groups for everything, by the way, so we didn't really know that would actually impact ADFS. Schema changes on AD, how we would have the teams from the Lync group playing together with the teams from the AD group. We did not really understood how critical web conferencing would be and how critical the maintenance or outages on our global internet gateways would affect that critical service. So because of that, we had to kick off some additional child projects, I would say, installing dedicated set of firewalls, dedicated set of internet accesses. We never used the reverse proxies at all, or not as standard, so we discovered that as well. So we had to design it, learn it, and install those TMG reverse proxies to serve the mobile client and web conferencing. SIP trunk and services, so that one was not unknown. We had a history of voice over IP and SIP trunk deployment in the region, providing soft phone services to end users. So that piece was partially implemented, but implemented with one provider in one region. So that project also allow us to spread the knowledge within other groups of the organization. Load balancers. So load balancers is very interesting as well. I don't know how many of you are using load balancers, especially from the big one vendor. They don't play well together with Microsoft being competitors. So you can find any reference design, any example of configuration. You just have to reverse engineer all the communication and make your configuration yourself. So our experience with that is that you should avoid it. So if you have no choice, just limit the load balancing based on hardware load balancer as much as you can and leverage DNS load balancing, which works pretty well. We had plenty of issues that just disappeared when we removed the load balancing, the hardware load balancing brick from the equation. So, or you can also use some qualified load balancers, which we are not doing. The adoption drivers, so those are the things that we were using for 2010 that we are definitely continuing to use. We definitely continue to use with Lync 2013 to drive the adoption, to drive the communication. All the team members, everyone involved into the service design are actually updating their signature in their emails with a few links to KBAs, links to help files, links to trainings, which we have designed for 2010 and we are upgrading for 2013. So CBD is computer-based trainings available to end users so they can just watch it when they want. We are publishing project status pretty frequently on our intranet, so all the SBG project leaders following the project with us can actually have a status as often as they want without having to call someone. Involvement of early adopters, pilot users is also key. This technology is so good that when you put it in the hand of those early adopters, they just like it, and they spread the message, and after that, the whole site wants it. I know exactly this is what's going to happen with the Lync 2013 mobile client. Roadshows, we're still doing roadshows, so selected people from the IT group are actually traveling to major sites, are conducting train-the-trainer approach trainings, so providing the knowledge to them and expecting those guys to spread the love across the organization, spread the knowledge about it, and making some demos as much as we can. So really not simple. Don't expect it to be just a Lync implementation if you do it in a large organization. That's going to trigger multiple child projects, and you have to be ready for it. So, a few other things. Endpoints. We have struggled with this for a long time. Should we go for optimized handsets? Should we go for qualified handsets? We have tried both. What I can share with you is that the optimized phones are very nice, plug and play, but not customizable. So if you have some requirement within some of your deployments about setting up a specific button on the phone, and that button will have a specific function, only the qualified phones will allow you to do that. Headsets versus handsets. On the first 2 or 3 sites we deployed, we actually provided both to every single users. And roughly after a month, they all gave back the handsets. They didn't want the space on the desk to be occupied by a device they don't use. So the few people who are actually keeping the handsets, and I'm talking about the optimized one, are keeping it because they use it as a speakerphone, which is also something we haven't thought about. We were thinking about the headsets. We had large volume negotiations with main vendors on that, but not about speakerphones. And there was a huge demand on that. The adoption of video, I'm probably not the first one or not the only one who will tell you this message. On day one, you enable it, everyone uses it, it's cool. After 90 days, no one uses it anymore. So if you are planning to upgrade the bandwidth of all your sites just to support video, and I'm not talking about the conference room systems, think twice. Location and latency. So that's an interesting one because the documentation lacks on that one. There are here and there some information about you, telling that you should have your Lync infrastructure being at the same local area, residing at the same location that your Exchange and unified messaging infrastructure because of latency. It should be on the same LAN. When digging a little bit more, you understand this is because it leverages some of those communication uses the MAPI protocol, and the MAPI protocol has not been designed for wide area communications. When you dig a bit further, you can actually find some information telling you that MAPI protocol will support you up to 250 millisecond round-trip delay. During our first implementation, so as I said, we have 2 global US data centers, 2 big clusters, one in Europe. We implemented the US first, and we enabled people from Europe homed on the US clusters very early in the project. Their mailbox and their Exchange servers are in Europe, and all the Lync infrastructure is in the US. It did not break anything, and we were a little bit above than the 250. So if you are concerned of the lack of information or concerned about that specific number being found somewhere in the blog or whatever, you would have to test, but don't be too afraid about that. That's going to work. As a matter of fact, we are actually not doing Europe for Lync 2013. We are deploying only in the US. Location and regulatory, that's something we are reusing a lot. That was a very painful and very expensive effort. We have presence in all the countries, in all the regions. All those countries have different rules, different legal and regulatory requirements. So we had to send our legal teams over there and negotiate with the local entities and to understand the laws and to understand the regulations, and therefore understand what we were allowed to do in those countries. Is voice over IP allowed? Is federation allowed? Is video allowed? In what context? So we spent a huge amount of time doing this. That's an invaluable information. A lot of people, just like I asked our providers helping us in the design, a lot of people are asking me, okay, can you share that information? I could share a few examples which are obvious, but unfortunately, it's not a question of data confidentiality or whatever. The answer from those legal and regulations will be different depending who you are. If you're a provider, you will have an answer. If you're Honeywell, you will have an answer. If you're Dell, you have another answer because of the type of business you're making in those different countries and different regions. So some of them are obvious, countries like places where there is a big firewall, big large firewall in the middle. Well, pretty obvious. Some others are not that obvious. Be careful of encryption for the very same reasons. Some countries will ask you to provide them your encryption keys, and they will also limit you to the length of the keys you are allowed to use. You cannot customize that on Lync. It's very, very high-end encryption. So there are some countries where the usage of the product is just forbidden because of that reason, or you just close your eyes and don't pay attention to them. Federation. As soon as you open federation, you also open voice over IP or federation. There are some countries which are allowing you to do voice over IP only within closed user groups. So basically within companies where you own more, at least or more 50% of everything. Federation is obviously nothing like that, because if we federate with, I don't know, with Dell, for example, we obviously don't own 50% of them. So that's not allowed in some countries for that reason. Personal use, data privacy. You will have to update your personal use statements. You will have to make it very, very clear to all your users. There are some countries like Germany, like France, like the Netherlands, where they are really, really bad with personal use and especially data privacy. You may not be allowed to log CDR, log IAMs, including if your company is forcing you to do that because of legal requirements. So those are the things that you have to understand before just switching on the button. Support convergence. We were organized really with a tower-based support model. So some people were doing AD, some people doing Exchange, some others doing the routers, the switches, and so on and so forth. We quickly understood that it would not work in case of an issue, in case of an outage. So something we did, which I share with you because that actually works very well, is that we created a team that we are calling the Center of Excellence. So this is a little group of people, 24/7, always available. They act. They are doing two things. They act at this third-level escalation for issues, and they are also acting as a routing entity. So they have a broad knowledge. They have network knowledge, link knowledge, AD, Exchange, a little bit of everything. So they are able to understand the correlations of all those pieces of architecture, and they are allowing basically to they are preventing finger pointing, ping pong games, even being internally with internal support teams, but as well that also works with the external providers. We have some frequent service family meetings, so we put all together service owners, service design, service operations for collaboration services, do the same for messaging, do the same for all the others, and we are exchanging all the information. That the information could come from the business side through the service owner, could come from the field through operations, could come from the innovation or improvement by service design. So all this information is very interesting and very important to be shared, so you can continue to maintain such a complex service over time with the right quality. Network. There are still some improvement to be made within the product. There are some things you can do by exporting the data from SQL and query databases. But there is something which is the Call Emission Control Exception report that is available in SCOM that would highly suggest you to use if you don't do already, or if you are going to deploy Lync 2013, which shows you with percentages and color coding which sites or which leg of each site are actually overloaded or almost overloaded by Lync traffic. So there is nothing yet such as proactive monitoring about it. That's the only thing you can use, and without that you just have no idea about what's happening on your network. Since we have deployed Lync 2010, we now have data about what's happening. So we have the data about how many users we enable for video at a site, how many of them are using audio, are they using federation or not, what kind of other software they are using. And what is the balance of personas within each of those branch. So all of this information is allowing us to build some models to better plan for future deployments. So when we have a new site with roughly the same quantity of users, the same type of persona, we are planning to enable the same type of features to them, we know the bandwidth they will require, instead of playing with those recommended numbers that never work. Quality of service, there was an interesting session about it upstairs earlier as well. You will have really to customize the ports being used by all your real-time modalities, audio, video, and stuff, and such, between servers, but also between the servers and the users. And you will have to play very tight with your telecom group and your telecom providers to actually configure the QoS or match the QoS settings with the port being used by Lync. You will have degraded service, degraded voice, degraded video otherwise. So our approach for the design. So we took all this information, we took all those lessons learned, we took some feedback from our business partners as well, from our provider partners too. So I forgot to mention that, but very early in the 2010 project, because that was really new to everyone, let's be honest. We involved some big telecom company consultants. We involved Microsoft as well, who were just with us at the same time, at the same site, at the same time, working with us for a few months on the design. So all of this actually allowed us to build this approach. So those are really more recommendations that I will not force you, obviously, but I would recommend you to follow. Build a lab, that's the top, that's the number one. That was not something we considered very important initially, but if Lync is something new to you, being to you or being to your teams, build a lab and get them access to the lab. We are organized the IT way, so we have a service design team separated from an operational team. This lab needs to be fully managed by the design team. The design team should not rely on other groups to make changes, to make configuration, to make customizations. And it should replicate production as much as it's really possible. So we did not do it within 2010. Within 2013, we have a completely isolated lab that contains its own load balancers. There is a dedicated internet gateway in it, so we can play with mobility, with all the SIP messages. We can test and validate web conferencing. We have Exchange, AD, all the components that are playing a role with the Lync service. Really, really key. And make sure that it doesn't share any components with production. Not so much for incidents, but if you share components with production, you have to follow your production processes, change management processes. So when you want to change a little flag in the configuration, that would take a week rather than seconds. Sizing. That's something we learned pretty late during the design stage. But again, a huge amount of data is available on the SQL databases. So if you are moving from 2010 to 2013, dig into this. You will find some information about concurrent usage of all the servers, all the front ends, and that allows you then to feed that information in your design for 2013 and actually have a design which is much more accurate than just using assumptions or calculations or estimations. The location, I told you a little bit about it earlier. We are not doing anything in Europe anymore. We are building Lync completely in the US because we are not afraid anymore about the latency. One exception though, if you are planning to deploy SIP trunking for dial-in conferencing or for dial-out for what we call roaming enterprise voice services, you would have to keep something in the region because the 250 millisecond latency is not an issue for MAPI protocol, but it is an issue for your human users. A lot of people on the voice over IP won't know that. So by having SIP trunks outside of your region, you're actually increasing that latency and the service, I wouldn't say become unusable, but it's really not as good. You got the walkie-talkie effect. People will have to wait for the other to talk and then wait a little bit more, otherwise you talk at the same time. So you really want to avoid that. So because of that reason, think about where your users are. And if they are in the region, you want to provide voice services to them, build a SIP trunk over there. And the SIP trunk will go with the mediation server, by the way. Migration, we do side-by-side migration. Simple for us, no real investment here. And yeah, Just makes sense. Okay. For Lync 2010, we built everything on physical servers. The reason was that at this point, Microsoft recommendations were to double the capacity of your environment. So I can't remember what the numbers were, but instead of having 10 servers in an environment, we need 20 because of the overhead of using virtual environments. That has changed with Lync 2013. So now you can use virtual environments. You don't need to build more servers as long as you use affinity with your resources, CPU and memory. And that also will help you with high availability. So it helps us because we are doing it on virtual for 2013. We decided to go with dedicated virtual farms. So we have within Honeywell a shared virtual environment. So we can just have, in a breeze, a virtual server, requesting some CPU, some RAM on it, and getting it on the shared environment. The problem is that we have little to no control on where the VM is going to reside, where in the environment, which blade server is going to reside on. Is there going to be any resource affinity being defined? So because of that, we made the decision to build our dedicated farm. So we have our own chassis, own blades. We are using the latest CPU from Intel, so 12-core CPUs, which allows us to also do the to put the VMs at the right place and still allow us to follow Microsoft recommendations, which is an 8 CPU, 8 core per server. Security requirements, we have plenty of those. I just highlighted the key ones for us that may remind you something if you belong in such a group company. Some of them are important and may play a key role for you as well. So the way we addressed it like that for 2010, but maybe too late. We did it really the right way with 2013. We involved our security group very early in the design process to allow them to actually learn about Lync, to allow them to read some documentation, to meet with some Microsoft folks, to meet with other companies or other security groups who have deployed Lync before. So they could exchange their concerns and they could exchange what is secure, what is not secure, and actually drive the security policies better. So we are trying to do something which we haven't a solution yet, but it's not a strong requirement at this point, which is locking the devices, so making sure that mobile devices that are not owned by the company will not access Lync through the mobile service. There are a few solutions out there, but for multiple reasons we cannot adopt them yet. The disablement of NTLM video authentication protocol. So that's a key one for us. That's a burning issue as we talk. NTLM v2 is considered as a weak protocol by our security group, and it is. So we can use it internally, but we cannot use it on unsecured network. Just as an example, we didn't know about that for Lync 2010. So we are currently using Lync 2010 mobile client that uses only NTLM v2. So that's a problem for us already that we're trying to solve as quick as we can. So Lync 2013 allows you to do that. Pretty recently, Microsoft published a few white papers to allow you to disable NTLM v2 on the edge and to implement certificate authentication and in collaboration with passive auth. So that's a true two-factor authentication mechanism that completely meets our security group requirements. We are going there. I alluded that earlier. The EWS exposure, so the exchange part of the service that is published on the web, no go, not allowed to do that. With the 2010 mobile client, that's an error message. With the 2013 mobile client, you can disable that integration from the policy. So no more error message, no more feature that will make the users think, oh, something doesn't work on my mobile device. And without breaking any functionality, because users can still join meetings from their native calendar. I would just kick off the Lync client and join. Preventing file transfer with the outside world. So being through federation, being with web conferencing. There are ways to do that. There are published ways to do that by defining specific rules on your edge servers. You can actually block all the traffic crossing the edge. And I forgot the third point, which is about outside access users, which we're not doing. But in case you're doing it, those outside access users could be considered as unsecured. They're anyway coming through the edge, so you can block file transfer and only file transfer by this set of policies. Implement two-factor authentication. I talked about it already. Load balancing. So I was pretty vocal on that one. I've been burnt with that one. So we decided for Lync 2013 to limit the use of hardware load balancing as much as we could. So you still have to do it for HTTP and HTTPS traffic, so we will do it, but that's pretty simple at this point. But for everything else, we just use DNS load balancing. No more concern with SIP or whatever, out of the picture. And that simplifies the design a lot. Policy redesign. So I try to be as simple as I can on that one because it's not. So we decided with 2010 to, if I take the network profiles, the bandwidth profiles used by CAC, we decided to define a minimum number of bandwidth profiles and to assign all of our sites to those small number of policies. The problem was that if a site is upgraded, the bandwidth of a site is upgraded, then you have to reassociate the definition of that site to either an existing policy or you have to create another bandwidth policy and associate it to it. That's not simple, especially when the provider does it for you and you're not the person who designed it. That's not the person who designed it that do it. All the other policies, so we moved from a one-to-many to a one-to-one bandwidth policy. So for every single site, we have a bandwidth policy. We upgrade the bandwidth here, we modify the policy here. No limitation in the quantity of policies you can use, so that's all good. We did the same thing for all the other policies. So we have a policy, if I take just the client policy, so we could have or a conferencing policy. We can have a conferencing policy that basically allows audio and video, another one that allows audio only, and we would associate users to those policies depending what feature we want to give them. The thing is that when you have a request from one of your customers, a branch, a country, they want a piece of service to be enabled for all their users at those locations. You have to find out who those users are, what their accounts are, and then reassociate them to another policy that would meet their requirements. And that's just way too complex. And again, there is no limitation in terms of the quantity of policies you can have on the system. So, and it did not include persona at this point. So the way we decided to do it is doing a one-to-many to many-to-one policy. So for one branch, for each policy, we would have, let's say, a conferencing policy that would be for a country, dash a site, dash a business group, dash a persona. And we would have many policies like that with the right configuration. That's difficult to set up on the first time, but when it's set up, it gives you a lot more flexibility. If you have a country that suddenly tells you, sorry, voice over IP is not allowed in there, it's pretty easy to do a string search on the policies and apply the right setting to all of them. And immediately all the users who initially belong to this policy will get that new setting. If you have a business group who would like one more feature to be enabled on all their users across the globe, same thing, pretty easy to find it, pretty easy to apply the right setting to the policy without having to reassociate users to those policies. So I think the two approaches are valid for the non-bandwidth policies, but if you are expecting to have plenty of changes on the request, on the requirement for your users, the second option is the best one. We have a challenge with the client version. We have no problem with licensing or cost or whatever with the Lync 2013 PC client because of the contract we have with Microsoft. However, Honeywell is not yet licensed for anything above Office 2007. If you don't know, there are some integration challenges. You cannot reply, if I just take one example, you cannot reply all with an IM from an email. You don't have the presence integration within Outlook if you are not using 2010 or 2013 within your Office suite. So those things are really a blocker for us at this point to upgrade to the 2013 mobile client, which means we are not going to leverage some of the features yet. That's going to come. One of them is group chat. We don't want the end-user experience to be complex for our users. Implementing group chats with the Lync 2010 PC client actually requires you to install a second client, and we don't want that. So we are not moving on with group chat at this point until we are able to upgrade the Office suite at least to 2010. Then we can upgrade the Lync client to 2013 and use group chat within the same client. And I'm done, so if you have any question. Okay, thank you very much.